So we're now just going to stitch around those curves. Make sure that you read the pattern so you know what seam allowance you're using. I'm just going to back stitch a bit at the beginning and make sure that you keep your lining and your exteriors perfectly matched, and that your zipper tail, depending on which side you're doing first, is not caught in your stitching. Your seam allowances need to stay open, which will reduce the bulk in your side seams. So there you go, I've stitched all the way around. I've got some threads there that need to come off. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to trim away any of the foam that's caught in my seam allowance. Again, if you've used fusible fleece, then you don't need to worry about this. And then I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side. This is the side where the zipper is, so I'm just going to use my finger now to make sure that that zipper tape keeps right out of the way as I stitch. And as I say, I'm stitching from the inside because I've got a flatbed machine and I find it just easier to stitch from the inside, but you can stitch from the inside or the outside. Making sure my zipper's out of the way. When you go over where those zipper tabs are, it can be a little bit thicker, so just go nice and slowly. If you've decided you're going to use the zipper tabs from the step up, then obviously you won't have any zipper tabs in there at all. A little bit of back stitching at the beginning and the end. Get rid of my threads and trim away any foam from seam allowance. Now at this point you can pull your linings out from inside of your bag, and this is when you should be stitching that bottom seam. So stitch the bottom seam and pull it out of the way so that you can open up your seam allowance. So don't do as Christine's doing, follow the pattern. It doesn't really matter, it just makes it easier to manipulate if you've actually done it in the right order. So pop your hand into your open pocket, and again you can see my fingers poking out of the corner there. Just splay your fingers and that will just box up that corner for you. Make sure that your seam allowance is open and that your seam matches on the bottom and on the side. And you can clip it, or you can just take it to the machine and stitch, which is what I do. So making sure that your seam allowance is nice and flat and open, reduces the bulk in the bottom and makes the corners in the bottom of your bag sit nice and flat and smooth. And again, I like to do just that second line of stitching just outside of my first line of stitching for security. And then you can trim off any additional seam allowance and any threads that you've got. And we're going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to go in through my pocket again. Splay my fingers to open up that bottom corner in my lining, matching the two seam allowances so that that seam sits nicely on top of the other. And taking it to the machine. Now, all of that pressing of those seams might seem like it's a bit of a faff, but I promise you it'll be worth it in the end. My second line of stitching just for security. And trim off the excess seam allowance. So now we don't have any openings at all. What we're going to do on these top corners is we're going to trim off the excess seam allowance at 45 degrees, and then that little bit extra, the same as we did on our pocket, we just want to try and remove any bulk from those corners that we can, because we want them to sit nicely. And we're going to do that on all four of these sort of top, I don't know if to call them corners, but the top parts at the top of the curves. Get rid of all of those bits. Then we're going for the magic bit. Now, if you've never made a bag before and you're starting to think, what on earth is she doing? Now, this is where it all starts to look like it should do. We're going to pop our hand in through our pocket, and I'm going to grab my bottom corner of my exterior with my hand inside, and I'm going to slowly pull it out through the pocket. Now, this is often referred to as birthing, and if you've got children, then this will kind of feel a bit familiar, although you've probably never witnessed it from this angle. We have quite a large pocket inside of here, so hopefully you'll find that your bag will birth through nice and easily. Once you've got the exterior out through the pocket, you can pop your hand back in through that pocket to push those bottom corners out. And then you can pop your hand in, while your hand's still in there, come up and push those corners out. And I just use the end of my finger. You can use a pokey tool if you've got one, to push those corners out on either side where that zipper sits. So at the top of the curves where we just clipped the excess fabric, the excess seam allowance, we're just going to push those out so that they sit nicely. And you're going to do that on all four of those corners. Once you've got those pushed out, you can push your lining back into your bag. You've still got your pocket linings here. Now I'm going to push them back into my zipper pocket for the moment, because until I've got everything as I want it, I don't like to sew that up. Push your lining down into those bottom corners. So you've got your hand inside and you're pushing your lining into your bag, into the bottom corners. And you should be able to see that it's all coming together beautifully. Now we've got a load more of that finger rolling to do. So I'm going to wet my fingers and I'm going to roll all around that top edge to make sure that my lining is inside and my exterior is on the outside, because and particularly on this because I'm using a light colour for my lining. Now, picking fabrics for linings is always a bit of a complicated one, and a lot of people say that you should only use light coloured linings in bags, because if you use a dark coloured lining it's impossible to see anything. Personally, I actually don't mind having a dark coloured lining in my bag, so but on this instance this is all I had that was in the right sort of shade of blue. So again, just going round those curves, making sure they sit nice and straight, and I'm just clipping them. Now you can press this if you want to. I find that I don't feel happy pressing, so I tend to just roll it. And along this top edge where you've got your zipper, just make sure that the zipper is fully extended out of the bag, and use your clips to make sure that the lining is inside and sitting nice and smooth and nice and flat. Excuse me. And you're going to go all the way around the top edge of your bag, rolling that lining so that it's inside. Just grab more clips. I'm just going to poke that corner out a bit more because it's not poked out far enough. I may even take a tool in to give it a bit of a extra poke. You can gain access via that pocket inside. Okay, that's better. Running back inside again. Now, if you've got a pressing ham or something like that, then you can actually put the pressing ham inside and give this a press if you really want to. So I generally don't on this bit, just because I think it sometimes flattens it too much. Now, we are going to do the top stitching. Now, this is the bit that a lot of people struggle with. I have a flatbed machine, so my machine, I don't have the capacity to be able to stitch from the outside, because well, I can do, but it means I have to kind of scrunch my bag up. So I find it's a lot easier for me to turn my entire bag inside out. And I poke out those bottom corners. And your inside will feel a little bit wrinkled inside of there, and that's because your lining is actually smaller than your exterior. And I will top stitch from this on the right side, but with the bag inside out. Now, the same applies as applied when we did our zipper inside, in so much as we want to bury our stitches. So make sure that you've got a long thread on the top and the bottom, and we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the very edge, and we're going to go all the way around. Now, if you're using faux leather and you've made a faux leather bag using the step up pattern, you can actually stop stitching approximately 1/4 of an inch away from that side seam on both sides, because it does get quite bulky there. So you can finish your stitching just a little bit before the seam and then a little bit after the seam, because the strap connectors for the step up version will cover that, so you won't have to worry about it. If you're using fabric, as I am in this case, then you will need to stitch all the way around. So making sure that it's nice and flat, increase your seam, your stitch length, make sure that you've got thread in your bobbin, because you don't want to be playing the bobbin roulette game. You do not need to back stitch at the beginning and the end, because you're going to bury your threads, and you're going to top stitch all the way around the exterior of your bag. Along the top edge, and now I'm coming down to do these curves. I'll take this slowly. And don't forget, you can manipulate your bag, because you can press it again afterwards, so you can kind of move your bag around so that you can get to the bits that you want to get to. When you've got foam in there, it does feel a little bit bulky, but it's perfectly doable. When you get to where your strap connectors are, it's a little bit thicker. So if you want to use a hump jumper, I don't know if I've even got my hump jumper here. I haven't. This is the hump jumper, and you can pop it under the back of your needle to help you get over that bulky area. I find that I don't actually need it on this, but if you feel that you've got too much bulk, then you can use a hump jumper, and you're going to go over those strap connectors, and you can hear the difference because it is quite thick. I'm going quite slowly. Again, if you've used fusible fleece, it shouldn't be too bulky, because you don't have any in the seam allowance at all. Again, I'm back up to the top on the other side. And then coming around that second curve. You can see I'm pulling and manipulating my bag underneath the needle. Going slowly over that strap connector because it is thicker. Now I have a size 16 needle in here because of I know that this is quite thick. If you've used faux leather, you may need as much as an 18, or cork for that matter. And I'm going to keep stitching until I get back to the point where I started my stitching, and then I'm going to try and land in the same hole as I did my first stitch, which I have done. I'm going to raise my needle, raise my foot, pull my work out, and I'm going to trim my threads over here so that I've got long threads at the front and 2 long threads sorry, 2 long threads at the front and 2 long threads at the back. So I'm just going to, my phone is telling me that it's nearly out of charge, so I'm just trying to find the chargy bit so that I can put the charger in so we don't die. Boom, there we go, that's better. So again, I have my self-threading needle. I'm taking those threads from the right side of my work, so from the exterior of my work, and I'm pushing them through that same hole, that last hole of stitching, except for I've completely missed the hole. Let's try that again, shall we? It would help if I looked at where I was pushing it through. To the reverse of my work. And I'm going to take my threads that I've pulled from the front and the threads that I've got on the back from the bobbin, and I'm going to tie them off, and then I'm going to do them 2 at a time rather than trying to put all 4 through the needle at once. And then I'm just going to bury my thread ends into my work. So I'm just going to pop my needle into my work and have it come out about 1 inch away. Drag those threads through. And I've dragged them through, and now I can trim them off. And they disappeared, they've gone inside. They've gone into the sort of the structure of the bag, so they're in the foam and inside. I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the other 2 threads, but I'm going in the opposite direction. It makes no difference whether you go in the opposite direction or the same direction, to be fair. Trim them off, and there we go. Now I can turn my bag around the right way and make sure it's all right, or I can just go straight for it and I can pull those pocket linings out. Now, this is where you realise why you did those little hems at the bottom of your pocket. So you made those 2 little 1/4 inch hems. Now what we're going to do is make sure that the sides match up. We're going to clip those 2 folded edges together. And because this will be, once it's sewn, the very bottom of your internal pocket, nobody is going to see this. So you can either close this by hand if you feel so inclined. I don't think I've ever felt so inclined to do. Or you can just run a line of stitching along with your sewing machine, which is exactly what I'm going to do. And I stitch at 1/8 of an inch. I'm just going to reduce my stitch length. 1/8 of an inch away from the folded edge. To close that up. Just a little bit of back stitching at both ends. Trim off any threads. And you can push your pocket lining, oh, I've got another thread there. You can push your pocket lining back into your zipper pocket and push out the corners at the bottom. And you can see that it makes a really nice, tidy looking zipper pocket. And you don't have any obvious means of where you've turned your bag through. So now we're going to take the whole bag, turn it right sides out, push out those bottom corners, and your lining should fit very nicely and snugly inside of there. Won't be baggy and bulky, and there we go, not a baggy and bulky lining. Actually, it doesn't look great from that angle, but from this angle it looks beautiful. And now I'm going to press the outside of my bag. Now, I've got foam in here, so sorry, that's my zipper pull banging on my table. I've got foam in here, so I don't feel the need to grab my pressing ham, because the foam is enough to insulate. But I'm going to press those side seams so that they sit nicely. And if you look at the difference between that one, where it sits nice and flat, and that one where it's not, it's a bit sort of puffy, you can see why I pressed that. I see a lot of people that don't put their bags up on various bag pages, and they don't press them, and I just think things could look so much better if you just spent 2 minutes with an iron. So press your corners, give the whole thing a really good going over. There's not too many seams to press, it's just the bottom and the two sides really. I also like to just go inside and press inside of my bag if my lining isn't looking, it's a bit creased. And I do have one of those mini irons that I usually use for this, but because I'm lazy and I can't be bothered to go and get it, I'm not going to. And that is pretty much your bag complete. Now I will come back to you. You can do the zipper up and you can see how wonderful that looks. Look at that. Aren't you pleased with yourself? Don't you feel chuffed? I do. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to you and show you how we fit the zipper end on the end of there. And I'm going to do, on this one, I'm actually going to do a fabric tab. So I'm going to show you how to do a fabric tab. It's not in the pattern, but it means that you don't have to buy a zipper end if you don't want to. And then we'll look at how we construct our strap and put our hardware on a strap and then attach it to our bag. And we are pretty much done. How gorgeous is that? Perfectly structured, beautiful, simple, and really, really classy. Love it.